All right, I'm excited for this video for you. I was going to make a fourth video on goals anyway, but some people have expressed recently on Facebook comments and so forth on the Law of Implication website about wanting to have a great 2014. So I particularly have put it into overdrive for you for this video. I've actually done 2 outtakes, about an hour long each. And I don't know, this video might be shorter than that, but I really want to get this for you. And I've spent about 2 days really working on it, besides recording it, but also just working on the ideas and getting it straight for you and the slides and so forth. So this video, in addition to everything else with the goals and the whole law of implication methodology, should really arm you to do wonderfully in 2014, or of course, whenever you're hearing this video, to move forward very powerfully. And so I'm directly going after that in this video. What I'm picturing for you is that, imagine, just for the sake of example, that it's the beginning of 2014, and according to the results formula where I talk about in the beginning of the Money Getting series with focus, desire, and belief. What I'm picturing for you from my perspective to make sure that I'm clearly motivated for this video is it's metaphorically, right? You're looking forward to a goal that you really want to reach in 2014, and you have a determined look on your face, and then you look at that goal, and then you see that the goal itself is a bit of an illusion. And then you look more carefully, even more determinedly, at even more clear and better version of that goal. And then you shift your focus to that. And then you move forward powerfully, smashing through obstacles that are in your way, gaining momentum, and having an eye open and an awareness when you start. And then as you continue to not take yourself out completely, like to wipe out in some way, where you either, of course, we don't want you to fully die, but also run out of money, just hit an overwhelming sort of obstacle that just stops you, and not just stops your goal, but somehow hurts your life or whatever. We don't want that. But otherwise, that you're just really able to go for it and smash through things and hit that correct goal. So that's what I'm imagining for you. In order to get there, here's what you need. You need to put yourself at need, whatever. But to get there, you need to put yourself in a position to be absolutely ruthless. But that's going to take clarity on multiple levels. There's 2 issues that come up that prevent people from being properly and absolutely ruthless. Now, if you are, and I'll tell you what they are, if you are properly ruthless, if you're ready to do within the right boundaries, whatever it takes to achieve your goal, then you will achieve your goal not only faster, but easier. And the difference will be very large. Much like I mentioned once or twice before about under hypnosis, because your muscle fibers work against each other, I don't mean even major muscles like your triceps and biceps oppose each other in a sense, but actually muscle fibers just in your bicep will oppose the main way that you're trying to lift. And under hypnosis, they'll be more aligned and you will be able to lift more. It doesn't mean you can lift 10 tons, right? So there's still could be a limit to what you'd accomplish in a particular time or how much you can lift physically. But under hypnosis, you'll always be able to lift more easier. So that's a little bit of a parallel example, just to understand what I mean, when it's always true that if you can put yourself in a position to be absolutely ruthless and be ready to do whatever it takes to achieve a goal, then it's actually going to be easier and faster. People are scared that if they're to do whatever it takes, they're going to have to work harder for their goal, because it's counterintuitive that if you're willing to do anything, that it's actually going to be easier for you, but it will be. Now, I said there's 2 issues that people run into. One of the main issues is that people, by default, you're probably driving with the brakes on. Much like with your muscles, you probably subconsciously and in your environment, your environment also tends to have be reinforced by your subconscious, meaning that you'll gravitate and allow things you'll either gravitate towards or allow things in your immediate and even farther environment. And you'll also be aware of it and allow it to affect you. That's pretty tied into your brain as well. And your environment isn't totally separate from the ideas in your mind either. So on various levels, you likely by default have brakes on while you're trying to go after a goal. It's normally how people try to accomplish things. is they're hitting the accelerator and the brake at the same time. And the way to do that is to clear out things properly with the right communication and planning ahead of time. The other problem that people run into, for people that have a little bit of an easier time just barreling forward and going after things in a somewhat ruthless manner in life, they tend to have a different error, which is being overly reckless. Where let's take imagine driving truck and you're going on a road and there's obstacles in the road, like maybe a chain link fence or a wooden fence or whatever. But then there's also some twists and turns that are treacherous. Then if you go too slowly, you run into the first problem where the obstacles will stop you instead of you just smashing right through them where you hardly notice them. So you want to make sure you're able to smash through obstacles. However, you also don't want to be taking a risk of driving over the cliff. So someone who thinks they're so smart and good at life and good at achieving goals because they're driving fast and smashing through obstacles, they might be going a lot faster than someone who's getting stopped by obstacles, but then they will often in life just end up over the cliff in one way, shape, or form. So we don't want that either. What I want to show you how to do in this video is a methodology for being absolutely ruthless, being able to do whatever it takes for a goal, but being able to do it within the right boundaries that you create for the situation. That'll enable you to avoid both problems. By having the right boundaries in advance, you can take the brakes off and not be scared about that, but without risking taking yourself out, without being reckless like some people are. It is fairly common with entrepreneurs where some people will really take a lot of action and they'll say, oh, look at all I've done. But they'll be bankrupt. And they'll say, oh, this happened, but they have all these mottos and they're all ruthless and so forth. But it doesn't help if they just keep taking themselves out as well. So you don't want to, it's very important to do neither of those things. I apply this consistently throughout my life. This is how I operate these days based on the law of implication. And it's a major reason why I've had the success I've had both in my relationship with my wife and also in business. And in the last year and a half, I've created a business from scratch called omgmachines.com with 2 partners. And on several levels, I was completely ruthless going after what we needed to go after, including customer success, by the way. When I speak of ruthless, remember, I'm talking about boundaries as well. And so we're not looking to hurt people and so forth, or to take advantage of people and so forth. And so results tend to be relatively easy for me to achieve. And I could achieve some fairly big results, especially compared with myself, right? For me to make between $500,000 and $1 million in a year personally, profit is extreme, right? I, for years, made like between 10 or 20,000, really closer to 10 from like the age of 20 to 30. And same thing with relationships and so forth. But once you understand how to be ruthless, you can really make life so much easier and achieve wonderful things. I'll give you an interesting example popped to mind that involves Jesus. And it's something he said that is a wonderful example of ruthlessness. And so I'll just read it to you. There's a couple of places where it's in the historical record of Jesus in either Luke or I think it appears in Matthew as well. You can Google any of the phrases if you want to find the exact reference. It says, Jesus said to another man, follow me. But that other man replied, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, allow the dead. You would expect, right, before you read on, in normal circumstances, if someone's talking to their pastor and they say, I need to bury my father, the pastor would be like, oh, of course, do that. Or if we're trying to do a business or something like that, it's oh, I need to go bury my father. Oh, sure. But Jesus said to him, allow the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God. So that's an example of ruthless, but very wise. Another person also said, I will follow you, Lord, but first permit me to say goodbye to those at home. Again, seems pretty reasonable. But Jesus said to him, no one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. So I switch back here to the slide, the original ruthless slide. So there is Jesus saying things that are quite counterintuitive, right? If you stop and don't already know what he's going to say. And it's not how people normally talk in life. But by approaching my business in that way, for example, where I worked basically every day straight for a year, including my son was born, he's about a year and a half now. So he was born right about the end of May, which is right around when we were starting to create the content for Well, we'd eventually go on sale with OMG machines for the first time in the beginning of September or early in September. And so we were starting to create things then. And my son had great difficulty sleeping, also burping, and even eating when he was a newborn, and really for 10 months. And it was extremely difficult. Even without knowing anything about that, people would say to me, "Oh, you have a new son," and they would laugh, which I think is obnoxious. But they would say, "Oh, you're not going to sleep for a while, are you?" It's a big joke, right? To be trying to start a business and then not be able to sleep. However, my response in my head, or even to them, would be, I'm going to get sleep. And I did. My wife had to handle it. And I had a lot of being ruthless takes planning in advance, knowing what your boundaries are and what you're willing to do and not do. I supported her financially. I got groceries and so forth because it's very difficult to go out with him or anything like that. She was getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night for months at a time, which is just way too little for her. For me as well, I need 8 or more hours of sleep to function. And if a baby doesn't burp, then you think that might be funny, except for when it happens, in which case it's like doing a triathlon. You have to just bounce them around and stuff for an hour or so, trying to get them to burp. If they don't burp, they don't sleep. If they don't sleep, you don't sleep. And again, that's cute for the first day or so. But if it goes on for months, it's the most effective form of torture is sleep deprivation. And it wasn't even a normal kind of situation of a baby not sleeping. It was worse than normal. It was worse than normally bad. It was but I got sleep. Not only that, but I had full focus on the new business that I was creating. And I'm not talking about what someone else should do, but the fact is that we were able to build the business. I was able to not only do my part, but the reality is, by the law of implication, what happens if I use that as an excuse to not take things as seriously as I need to? I didn't work every day because I wanted to. I don't wake up and create work for myself. Trust me. I only work because I have to. I don't enjoy doing things for a career that I'm doing for money, like because I have to. I want to do things that I choose to do. And so it wasn't something that I enjoyed. It wasn't a niche that I particularly liked or anything like that. There was really nothing about it that I particularly innately wanted to do. Or I was just doing it for the money. It was very important to me that the people that were buying our product or taking our coaching and training would be successful. But I'm not a workaholic. There's nothing about that. Purely, and this is an interesting lesson with goals, is that if you not only do you want to set in your mind what you want, but you want to continuously have a comparison in your mind with what you don't want. And I don't want to work for someone else at a job. And it was going to be this, so I need to make my online business work. I was already had success before that, but this was going to take my ability to get out to a whole new level, and the ease of making income in a good way and working with terrific people to a whole new level. And so I really focused in. It was time to do that. And I got sleep. And how did I get sleep? I got sleep by having a separate bed on a separate floor of my house downstairs. And of course, I spent some time with my wife and so forth. Though it was a very busy and difficult time. So we did our best. But at night when I was sleeping, or not at night, I sleep at random times. I'm like an artist. But also because I don't have a fixed schedule. And again, because our son would wake up and make noise throughout the night and so forth. There's no way I could sleep unless I was separate on a different floor. And so I did that. And so whenever it takes, but that made it, all told, it was far easier to achieve my goal. Instead of it being 2 or 3 years later, and I'm like, oh, making money is hard and blah, blah. I went after it with proper ruthlessness, with the proper boundaries in place. As I said, I supported my wife in a number of ways that she needed it, but I wasn't just up there not getting sleep and holding her hand and so forth. I was making the business work. And every time if the phone rang and one of my business partners needed to talk, and whenever I had to do something proactively, which was constantly, and create things myself, I was doing that. And it was a priority. It was really an absolute priority, unless there was some like major medical emergency that was urgent that for some reason needed me and not just an ambulance or a taxi, right? I'm not a doctor. So even in that case, I might have just let them handle it and focus on what I needed to do. But of course, to any extent that there was something with an absolute emergency that was urgent, of course, I would do that. But again, that's my red flags where I don't drive over a cliff. And I didn't sacrifice my relationship in any way with my wife. Now, what some guys will do, I heard of 2 people recently, other friends of a friend, where they thought it seemed like their wife wanted a lot of money and stuff. And so they worked and made that money. And then unbeknownst to them, their wives just arranged, their wives didn't have to work. And they just took their time, felt neglected, felt like they were the victim somehow, and went and took most of their money, got a divorce and left them and took a lot of their money. So that's another example of you don't want that reckless ruthlessness where you're driving over a cliff, where these guys made plenty of money, but they neglected their relationship. Now, here's how we do this. The only way to do this is to plan things properly in various ways in advance. So you can't just be ruthless through the law of intention, because the law of intention is not a real law, right? It doesn't work. You can't do it just through emotion and that sort of thing, through effort. You do it through the law of implication, where the only way you can cut loose and go after what you want with absolute momentum is to clear out obstacles properly and have safety flags up. So you got to get to this point where you can be absolutely ruthless, but the only way is through the law of implication, which involves clarity, and I'll go over that now. All right, I'm going to cover this in enough detail that you can follow it, and you should, and your life will be way more powerful and easy if you do, but not so much that I'm overcomplicating it or so forth. And it's pretty easy to understand. So first of all, pick your battles, right? If you watched my first video on creativity where I talk about creative focus, there's one thing you can have your creative focus going towards. When I was building my OMG Machines business, I couldn't have my creative focus going to my family situation at all. All right. If I even did it one day out of 7, then it could really hurt my momentum. It could have been way harder. It could have been twice as hard, which might have meant that I would never achieve it. Maybe if I take my momentum down from 100 miles an hour to even 80, maybe I run into an obstacle that I could have only bust through going at least 90 miles an hour. Maybe I get totally stopped. Right? That absolutely happens in life. So I was going to go forward with full momentum. Again, I have some red flags up. If people absolutely need me, can take care of that. But I wasn't going to be trying to have these ongoing nagging problems of other places. There were enough ongoing nagging problems with trying to create a business, and that was going to fill up. So that was my battle, and I was going to fight that battle and no other ones. If someone tries to pick a fight with me in some way or anything like that, even within business, but it's not taking me straight to where I'm trying to go with building the business that I'm trying to build, I'm not going to get involved in that fight. Right? If I have to surrender, even I might do that. If I'm going to fight, I'm not going to fight because someone else picks the time and the place. I'm going to fight. And of course, this is also metaphorical. If I'm going to try to solve a problem, it's not because the outside world picks the time and the place. The outside world can't tell me what's urgent. All right. I'll decide what's urgent. I'll decide what I'm going for, not external circumstances. External circumstances might change the situation so that something legitimately becomes urgent. But in most cases, people in your life or events in your life are trying to quote unquote you something's urgent when in fact it's not. All right. Unless it's going to fully take you out, you probably can just surrender at that moment or defer it or postpone it until a time when you're ready to win before you fight. If I fight, a person does not want to be fighting against me. Not because I'll necessarily win. They might defeat me, but I'm going to be having absolute ruthlessness if I'm going to go after something. Absolute ruthlessness. It's not emotion. It's not BS. I'm going to plan and do what I'm about to show you, and I'm going to put myself in a position to go for it fully. And so even if someone were to defeat me, if it was some case where I'd have to be against someone else, of course, I don't want to be against anyone else. I don't really have issues. I don't look in life that way where it's me against other people. However, if it was that case, maybe they would win, but it would be a pain in the butt because, again, I would have this full kind of not reckless abandon, but absolute ruthlessness. So my point in saying that is only this: unless I'm willing to approach things that way, where I'm going to win before I even start, because I'm ready to be absolutely ruthless based on planning and the circumstances, then I'm generally just not going to try to fight. Unless, again, that thing that came up would take you out. If it would, then you might need to. And if you need to, then you might want to just fully switch, drop your main goal that you were focused on and fully go and take care of the thing that was going to take you out with absolute ruthlessness, and then go back to your original goal. Okay. And by the way, this can apply to family stuff versus business stuff, which comes up all the time for people. Probably the number one thing holding people back in business is they feel like they have to attend to all these issues with their dating relationship and family life. You can maintain a wonderful relationship while going fully after business if you do it right. But you can only be creative and really go after with absolute ruthlessness one thing at a time, as far as I can tell. Maybe if you find a way to integrate the goals so they're intertwined, but it might be overly complicated, overly tricky, overly cute. There might be circumstances where that does work. You can decide that for yourself and work on it yourself. All right, now, so you pick your battles. As part of picking your battle, or related to that, is decluttering and simplifying. So you want to clear out your life and your mind of goals that are not as important and factors that are less important. My life is really simple. On most days, I have 0 things scheduled. And yet I work consistently throughout. Basically, I work just about every day at this point. These days, I'm not really working so much to make money my business works pretty smoothly at this point, my other business. But right now I'm working to create this for people and for you. And then I'll be working to spread the word so that the world can be made perfect. This is my kind of master plan, this whole law of implication thing. And hopefully you will join me on that to some degree or to a great degree. Right. So to that end, because I'm going for that, I keep my life very simple. I don't pride myself on the number of friends that I have. I don't go running off to do all sorts of family stuff. I know how much time I'm going to spend with my family. And if I can spend more time and I want to, then I will. It doesn't limit me, but that way it doesn't just pop up when I don't want it, when it's going to mess me up on going after a goal that I need to go after ruthlessly. And right now, there's so much suffering, the needless suffering and problems that I help with to such a great degree. If I can spread this, then I'm going to go after spreading the law of implication and explaining it properly. Spreading it both within one person's mind in terms of explaining it well and then spreading it into more minds. All right, so you want to declutter and simplify your life. Let me put a diagram that'll help here. It helps to build on a diagram I showed you before, if you've seen the video where I did. So I talked about vectors, and this helped a lot of people where I pointed out how your mind, your goals, your immediate environment, and your more distant environment can have factors in it. I added this phrase, these can also be thought of as factors. If you're going after a goal, there's things that are going to help you in your mind, beliefs and other goals and people in your life and circumstances like with money and what you currently have your time devoted to and just what's around your immediate environment, even things that you look at and what your maybe habits of ways you entertain yourself or what you believe will help you with work and so forth. So you have all these factors and vectors. I showed you this already. And of course, you want to get these aligned in one direction. You have so much more power, just like muscle fibers. However, not all these factors, this is overly simplified in a way that I can help you see something if I give you 2 more slides. I took about half the vectors out at random. So I took this original slide with the vectors and I just deleted about half of them at random. And this can represent vectors that you see, including if you stop and think about it a bit. Although at first, when you stop and think, it's just kind of surface level, obvious stuff. As you dig deeper, you can potentially be aware of most or all of the factors. But at first, you'll only see some of them. Now, and then let me skip to the next slide and then I'll skip back. On the other hand, and then I went back to the same slide and I removed another about half of them at random, and not the other half, but just at random again. So there's some overlap in 4 quadrants, in essence, where some vectors actually matter. They're actually important, and some are more important than others. Some, and they matter. Some, but they don't matter. Some you don't see, but they're very important. Some, again, goals, beliefs in your subconscious, etc. Right? People might have a number. People generally have a number in their subconscious of how much money they think they should make based on mostly what people made on average when they were growing up, right? Or maybe what their peers make. And depending on whether some people want to be a little bit better than their peers, some people want to be just not quite too far behind their peers, depending on that, then that number might be adjusted a little bit. But and so that would be an example of a goal that a lot of people aren't aware of, is to hit that level, but not higher, not lower. And the way to work through something like that is to walk through things clearly, right? You imagine, what will it take for you to hit that number? Or maybe you're already at that number. And then you ask yourself, what if I made $5,000 more? How would that be? Would that be better? What would that take to do it? And you keep working through that, and then you'll bust through. You'll have more clarity. Clarity is always what's going to help you to break apart things in your subconscious that you want to break apart. Sometimes your neurology will take time to catch up with that, meaning that there are 2 buckets. One is 2 issues going on. One is whether you affirm a belief, whether you feel like and this can also be subconscious, whether subconsciously you feel like you should feel a certain way, like whether you should eat cake or not if you're trying to lose weight. And then separately, there's the issue of whether you have a wired up habit. The habit will sometimes have to take time to degrade, depending on how you frame the issue. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but you can reframe the issue so it's categorized differently. So that, like, maybe if cake really is framed as something that's particularly gross, even subconsciously, then you might not eat it at all just by changing the framing. However, sometimes it's difficult to do that quickly and effectively. So realistically, sometimes it's going to take your neurology time to catch up. But if you're going to have a full mental block, if you think you should feel a certain way. So at least with clarity, you can get rid of this feeling, including the subconscious feeling that you should make a certain amount of money. But then another part of the feeling will take time to catch up, where you're still kind of wired up that way. But your brain, things that don't get reinforced through believing that you should feel that way, will degrade over time. And the more you have experiences where you're reinforcing the better habit or belief, then it'll happen more rapidly. Sometimes people ask me about that, where they say, oh, I want to change this thing in my subconscious. How do I do it? The way to do it is first get clarity on whether you have beliefs that are reinforcing it. And then once you get rid of those beliefs, then at least worst case over time, it'll degrade. And through having experiences in a different direction, a different habit or something. And then you can also work on the framing. That's more of something, though, for a different video. All right, so you have these vectors that actually matter. I started talking about that because people wonder, how do I change the vector from going in this direction and going in this direction in my subconscious? Address that a little bit there. But just by everything I'm talking about will help you do that. Everything in this video will help you get things going in a direction better. And clarity in general is always going to help get vectors going in the right direction. So certain things actually matter. You want to figure out what those are and get them straight. There's ones you'll see, but then you want to think more deeply. With law of implication, you don't just look at the reason for something. You have to look at the reason for the reason and the reason for the reason and for the reason. That's how I kept digging and came to understand that the most important question to address was, how do we know what's true? How do we have a method for thinking with perfect accuracy? Unless we address that, then we can't know anything else. So when I realized that, then I figured that out and then built up from there. And it was a radically life-changing thing. All right, so with this illustration in mind of vectors that really matter, and then this original vector slide, now I'll go back to what I had here and we'll continue on. So pick your battles, declutter and simplify. Oh, and so if you declutter and simplify things, that's why I went over to that slide, it's easier to see things that you previously were missing. Don't try to get clarity with a crowded, cluttered, complex plan or mental screen or whatever. Or don't have 100 goals and try to put them exactly in height order or importance order. It's much easier if you have 3 or 4 goals that are going on, or 2 or 1, then it's a lot easier to see what's important. This is where the ruthlessness comes in. Naturally, your brain's not going to be distracted by other little goals. If you're really clear on what you want and you're going for that fully and only and ruthlessly, then that implies to your brain that other stuff is not important. So you don't have to identify then every little goal or belief in your subconscious. Those just get steamrolled out of importance by really focusing strongly on one thing that you want. Remember when you are, actually, I'll get to that. I'll finish my sentence when I get to focus. Remind me of that. All right. Then now this is very important, to figure out your boundaries. If you don't figure out boundaries, both moral and also just practical boundaries in your life, such as, for example, that, like, what if so these guys where their wives left them because they felt neglected, or maybe their wives were just purely evil, and maybe they were just partially evil and also felt neglected. But one way or the other, that the guys that happened to, they probably didn't have the right boundaries protecting their relationship. So I make sure that on average, we try to get to where we're spending about an hour a day romantically. I'll talk about this more in the relationship module, but about an hour a day romantically, which kind of means like you're just talking. Most of that means my wife can talk about what she wants to talk about. Although for sure, she's happy to talk about things. It's just something interesting to me. If it's of kind of importance, it's not all that satisfying for her. If I'm just going to talk about a video game or something like that, is not really something that I do, because it neither qualifies as romantic time nor as a sexual type of intimate time. So about an hour of romantic time, and then about an hour of a kind of sexual, a more close type of, or intimate, whatever type of interaction, about an average of that each day. That could mean none one day, half an hour another day, an hour and a half another day, 2 hours one day, right? But it just I don't mean like I have a stopwatch at all, but just have that as a general guideline. And I'm not like, I don't time it, but it just have that general sense. But if I had no specificity, then that can cause, it makes it much more difficult. So there's nothing wrong with having some specificity there. It would be a little weird to have it like a stopwatch or time it. I wouldn't do that either. But by not even having specificity in my mind or any sense of how much time was going, then all sorts of bad things happen. Either guys end up putting way too much focus, their relationship, which is okay if that's what you want to go for ruthlessly, but it's not okay if you're trying to succeed in your career, because you really won't be able to do it in most cases. The other thing they'll do though is not protect the relationship with boundaries. They'll drive off a cliff and not give their relationship enough attention. And so if you have a good boundary, I was able to focus with absolute ruthlessness on my business while having my relationship protected. And not just protected so my wife won't leave me, but protected for myself, where I wasn't upset and miserable because I wasn't if I was feeling too lonely, right, and so forth. But by having that amount, I was able to not feel lonely. My relationship was able to stay great. It was a very difficult time for us during the actual 10 months when Chance didn't sleep or burp or very well or anything like that. But our relationship fully stayed intact. There was no sense of leaving each other, or no one was secretly plotting to get away or anything like that. And if it ever became particularly difficult, we needed to have a discussion and make sure that we did spend enough time together, then I'd have a red flag. I might spend a day dealing with that. And 10 months into it, I spent about 3 days really focused on dealing with the sleep situation, which essentially necessitated a different type of ruthlessness and boundary, where it just got to the point where he was old. And when he was very young, only a few months, you want to meet every single need, and they want them to feel like that's the way the world is, because that's important. But then at 10 months, and if they're not sleeping through the night, it's just critical that you don't hear them cry. And so I had to get my wife downstairs, and that took a lot of focus for me, because it meant that I wasn't able to sleep easily or well at the time that I wanted to, because I would need like uninterrupted, not stuff going on where she's waking up or going to bed at a different time than I would naturally do it. And my schedule's all over the place. So I spent about 3 days really focused on making that happen. And then everything got way better. So again, another red flag. And then I approached that situation with the proper amount of ruthlessness, made sure, of course, that our son was safe, and we tried everything else first. But there came a point when the right answer, and it was the right answer, and it worked out wonderfully for everyone. It's no good for him, our son, if his mother doesn't get for months. She's just destroyed. It was going to be far better for him if we let him cry out and learn to fall asleep by himself than to just have his wife and father devastated and their lives destroyed and devastated by that. And again, it was successful, my intervention. And I'm not trying to take all the credit for it, but much like with my business, has nothing to do with taking credit. Greg and Mike individually were probably more valuable than me. Clearly, we couldn't have done it without. There's no question they couldn't have done it at all without either one. If either one of them wasn't fully at what they were doing and doing it very well. However, my role was critical as well, is all I'm saying. So it was critical that I did what I did. It's always going to be the case in life, right? When you go after a goal ruthlessly, it doesn't mean that you're the one solely responsible for accomplishing it. In a lot of cases, it might be that other people are just as critical or even more critical. But still, it could be the case that if you don't do your part, then it wouldn't have been accomplished at all. And so that's what I mean about approaching the situation with my son Chance learning to sleep through the night. I approached it with a ruthlessness that was necessary, and everyone was better off for it. Had boundaries, make sure he was safe, made sure and there's boundaries in terms of kind of external stuff like that. And then there's moral boundaries, right? Make sure that it was pretty much the last resort, right? If there was a different way to do it, I would have loved to do it that way. Or at least it was the next best resort, I suppose. So I could drug their child or something like that. But of course, I can't imagine a situation where I would do that. If it was that or something even worse happened to him, I guess I would. But that's never come up, and I presume it never will. And even if something like that seemed to come up, I would continue to search for a very long time, unless it was just an imminent great danger. And I'm not trying to talk about that topic specifically. I'm just giving you a sense of, I'm trying to explain this idea of boundaries and then being ruthless. So you want to figure out your moral boundaries. If you don't figure out your moral boundaries, then you're going to be double-minded, right? Which means you're going to have subconscious things working against you, sabotaging you. So with my business, one of my moral boundaries was that we had to be going for customer success in a pretty strong it's impossible to define some of these things perfectly, but basically when going for something as giving it a reasonably strong focus, like saying something like doing everything reasonable to do that is fine. It actually works. It's not overly vague to say I wouldn't say doing everything possible, because that's innately a silly statement. instead doing whatever's reasonably able to do. And there's a lot that's reasonably possible to do to make sure your customers have the best chance of success. And I think we've done that, and we've gotten way more success with our customers and members than is typical for our industry by a factor of probably like 50, maybe a factor of 100, depending, which provides a bit of empirical evidence that the boundary of doing everything that reasonably possible to ensure success of your customers is a fine boundary that'll actually be effective. You can flesh that out a little bit, and I recommend doing so by thinking it through a little bit, like examples, and saying, all right, let me think of some examples in advance. So in our case, it was important that we provide the training in advance. Before we went on sale, that we had a lot of the training done, if not all of the training done. If it was sold as a complete product, then it would be fully done. If it was sold as an ongoing coaching, then at least would be literally months ahead with the content on that. And that it would be very clear to me, for example, that Greg, which it was, he's amazing, had both the knowledge and the motivation and the integrity to create the training that he needed and to do what he promised he would do. And he had a lot of opportunities naturally to show. I use a kind of idea like a stepping stone idea, and this will be very helpful for you. What you want to do in order to, when you're planning, if you're thinking about something and if you come to a conclusion like, oh, this woman's wonderful, she'll be a wonderful wife, or that in this case, Greg Morrison, our coach, would be a terrific coach with energy and integrity and knowledge, and he's brilliant at what he does. And so that's a conclusion. Now, if I'm going to act on that conclusion, then I should be willing to use that conclusion as a premise and come up with a natural stepping stone. So when I say use it as a premise, so if it's the case that Greg, and it turned out to certainly be the case, that Greg has great integrity, brilliant at what he does, and lots of energy and motivation and proactivity and so forth, then he would create videos ahead of time with the training, and he'd be willing to work with me because I have a good amount of expertise because I taught accelerated learning for 10 years. And because I really focused on doing a great job with that and having customer success there, that I have a lot of expertise with how people learn and what's necessary. And so if I needed him to redo a video, or I strongly thought it would be better for people, then would he? Now, I would never do that just to test him. I created no artificial circumstances to create a test. I don't do that. What I do is I find natural circumstances that would happen a certain way if the premise is correct. So first it's a conclusion. The conclusion is Greg has integrity, proactivity, and so forth, brilliance. Then I take the conclusion and take it as a premise. So it's the same statement, but I'm moving it over, so to speak. And then I use it as a premise to think, all right, what would naturally be something that Greg would do if that premise was true, if that conclusion was correct? And then when that comes up in real life, then I notice when Greg doesn't, and he kept on doing it, right? So that leads me to believe, it doesn't mean I know for certain, but now it's reasonable to act on it. So part of customer success in that case, and part of my planning and my boundaries was that I didn't want to bring a new product to market anymore where I hadn't thoroughly tested out the coach, because I had done it in the past where there was plenty of evidence to think that the person would fulfill well and do a great job, but then they wouldn't. And so it was time to not do that anymore. So that's an example of a boundary and a moral boundary where I would have been self-sabotaging most likely, or my subconscious would have been working in different directions, that means. And I cleared that out by knowing what I was and wasn't going to do. So I was going to do everything reasonably possible, everything reasonable to ensure customer success. So you want to figure out your moral boundaries ahead of time, and then you won't be self-sabotaging. Which, when I say you won't be self-sabotaging, of course, what I mean is your subconscious won't be going in various directions without you noticing. And then also figure out red flags, figure out things that could take you out, such as with my relationship, what I would do to attend to that and make sure I wouldn't lose that or have that degrade to a really bad point. Also with money, I wasn't going to spend a lot of money to invest in the business. You don't really have to with online stuff. And so one of my things that keeps me from driving off a cliff is I mostly wouldn't spend money unless it was I can clearly link it up to where it was necessary and related to profit. So I wouldn't be looking to do a lot of things that maybe had some theoretical way that it would end up helping us make more sales or get more affiliates to promote us. A little bit of that starting out, but not stuff that I just couldn't connect at all. That it was just pure kind of pure theory in the sense that pure theory is fine if it's good theory, but if there's no reason to, people often just spend money they're doing business on things that they just have this theory that it'll help them make profit, but I really want to be able to tell that it'll make profit very clearly, or else I tend to not do it. And that's different than how a lot of people operate, but it works very well. And again, it allows me to be fully ruthless without driving over a cliff. It also means that I'll have money still saved up to smash through a boundary, an obstacle that comes up later that will take money. I think that's clear enough. I won't go into examples, but that's helped me a lot in the past to operate that way. One quick simple example is I didn't have Mike run off and do a whole lot of trips to like conventions and so forth to meet affiliates, but he did do one, which was great. But then after that, it was more of a not necessary type of thing. And most of there has to be a clear connection of how we need it. And it's going to clearly bring us money, not just try something and do a lot of stuff. Go flying off somewhere. When the time comes, those 3 days turn into 6 days where there's nothing else can get accomplished, because by the time you're having a plan for the trip and then take the trip and travel out there, travel back, you're losing it's a massive cost. And whereas there's plenty of clear ways that those 6 days could have been used to make direct profits. All right, then once you've done all that, then you just want to focus, and again, in an absolutely ruthless way. And I said to remind me of something, and thank you, you've done that. One thing you want to do is keep clearly in mind not only a scenario like from the results formula of focus, desire, belief, of what will happen after you're successful, but do make sure you do that, and make sure there's the law of implication. Make sure you're speaking to your brain in its language, which means you're implying to your brain the right thing. You're getting the real result you want, which is your brain to get your goal. Your brain's language is scenarios. It's fine if you write it. It's helpful actually if you write it on a piece of paper, by the way, as opposed to just think that you have the goal. But then clearly picture a scenario that would happen immediately after you achieve your goal. Right? That is how you speak in your brain's language. But you want to do a second thing, because you need to keep your motivation at its peak level consistently. And the way to do that is weirdly simple. And that is to fix in your mind what it would be like if you don't achieve your goal, or before you've achieved it, what it's like now. So remember what it's like to not have the money, or what will happen if you make your business work. When it comes to my relationship, one thing that relationship books seem to fully ignore is the motivation. They focus on you motivating your partner, like making your partner like you and love you and all that. But they tend to ignore your own motivation for doing that, for wanting to be in the relationship yourself. I don't. That's vitally important. So I keep fixed in my mind how I would have felt if I met my wife back when I was in high school, if I'd been shown what my life would be like after I accomplished my goal of meeting somebody. I would have been wildly happy. So I remember what I also compare with if I didn't have the relationship that I have. And I compare it with not having it. I don't compare it with some fantasy version of her that's even better, or some fantasy version of someone else that I fabricated in my mind. Right? That's going to ruin your motivation, and it's total fantasy. It's totally false. It doesn't exist. What does exist is what will happen if you don't get what you're going for at all. Now, that brings me to remind you of another red flag to have that's very important. I've mentioned this in a different way, but I want to make sure you get it in this way. It's critical. Remember, I talked about exit strategy. It's critical that you know in advance what is going to cause you be such a great opportunity that you're going to abandon this goal for a supposedly better opportunity. This is deeply important for obvious reasons. So if you're going to get in a relationship, decide in advance when you're going to leave the person you're in a relationship with for someone that seems better. Of course, that should be just never, right? There might be an extreme circumstance where you get out of your existing relationship and start from scratch, but you probably would never want to just be looking to trade up, right? But figure that out ahead of time and understand why, get clarity on that. When it comes to a business opportunity, people are just running after this shiny object, that shiny object. We try to keep them from doing that with our business, and we're fairly successful and we're pretty shiny ourselves. But We don't tell people you can push one button to make millions. And so if someone's going to fall for that, then they're going to fall for that and they get the results they get. But by the way, I was mentioning to Mike, and said something that he found interesting, my business partner and my closest friend. Uh, I pointed out that if someone's going for like push button millions, let's say they want to learn how to make money online, then basically they're going for some sort of offer where people are telling them they could be an affiliate marketing someone else's product. It's generally not about creating your own product. And generally it's not about doing consulting for search engine optimization offline. Or not offline, but it's called offline for some reason, if you're doing consulting for another business. But generally these push button millions type of offers are these things that where doing some kind of affiliate offer, or even if it's like in real estate or some such, then constantly there's no caring about the end customer in like this. Okay. So here's what I mean. It could be misinterpreted. So let's say you're a person who wants to make money online. You're like, and then you hear about a push button millions. Here's how you can make millions online. You buy that product. If while you're buying that product, that customer aren't thinking about the customer of the product that you're being an affiliate for generally, if that makes sense. And so the customers that are allegedly getting ripped off, like there's a general idea that people that buy like how to get rich quick stuff, they're getting ripped off by evil gurus. And I'm not saying that isn't the case. However, they're opening themselves up for that because they don't have the right boundaries themselves. If they were focused on the success of the end customer, where they were going to get their money, if they were thinking about how they would create value for other people, then they wouldn't buy those offers in the first place, most likely. You see? So by having the right boundaries, they would avoid getting pulled off from these other opportunities. Same thing in business, same thing in relationships. Figure out ahead of time when you're going to go after a different opportunity. Often the answer would be, I'm not going to, or there's some time limit. I'm not going to do that for 2 years. I'm not going to try to look for a different opportunity. I'm going to focus on this. If you're going to do that, of course, you want to plan, you want to make sure you're going after the right thing. Remember, my original vision for you was that not that you go after the first goal that you think of for 2014, no matter how shiny and good it looks, but that you examine that goal and then look for, maybe there's a slightly different goal. Maybe it's still about making money, but maybe the totality of that goal and your vision for how you're going to make that money, maybe they end up being different after you think about it more clearly. And then when you go after a goal better with the right boundaries, you're just so much better off in every way, right? If you put very little thought into the goal itself that you're going after, then you might realize halfway through correctly that it's a pretty crappy goal, and then you're going to be confused and tempted to go off. And then if you operate that way constantly, then you're always running up after a different goal. And it's not really necessarily because you lack motivation. Maybe it's because the goals themselves were just actually inherently, by the law of implication, right, implicitly, not very great goals to go after in the first place. Or maybe your vision or your general plan, which would be small and limited, just a highlight reel like I talked about, where you're just seeing a few bits and pieces of what you're trying to go after, and that's your goal regarding like a business plan, then it's not good. It's not very appealing, even if you did achieve it. And then if you keep doing stuff like doing that, then it's going to make sense for a good reason for you to keep shifting gears and never get momentum. And the way to not have that happen is to think through your goal. Think, okay, if I achieve this goal, then walk through what will happen after that, and will it really be worthwhile achieving? Secondly, think, okay, wait, remember, declutter and simplify. Think more simply about what you really want. What are you going to use the money for? Why do you want money? And so forth. And then think, was my original goal about how to go make that money, is that an overly restrictive strategy? Maybe I don't need to decide my strategy for making money as if it's a goal. Maybe the goal is just like financial security or independence. Then you don't even have to say that it has to be your own business at that point. Maybe working for someone else is the way to go. So maybe you just set the goal in a more generalized fashion. That's actually okay. But you still want to work out a strategy ahead of time. But your goal might be more general, and you don't have to include or assume a strategy, an overly restrictive strategy within your goal. Now, you might, as you think about the goal more, you might think, yeah, I really do want to do it my own business, and that's fine. And then you get clear on that, and then you picture that more clearly. But for starters, simplify what you really want, and then that'll allow you to be smarter about what strategy you're going for. All right, I have some more to say to you, but I'll end this video here because it's gone for nearly an hour. and then I'll get into a little bit more instruction on the process for doing this.